you read books to like learn how to do stuff, but you read books depending on because you can also have like buffs and debuffs in your character for like how fast you read, right? Or if you even can.
But I think it's just that you read really, really slowly or something.
My character Stefan reads very slow.
Yeah,
So,
but it's like a page every 2 seconds or something like that. But it's like a 220 page book, right?
Butterscotch.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 399 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast, Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth, and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam, and I'm the webs programmer.
I'm Sam, and I'm the artiste.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today is January 20th, 20 Jubilee. And before we get started, we have a warning. There's going to be profanity in this show. So get ready for that. And we'd also like to thank our supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. Thank you so much for your recurring donations to help us keep almonds going into our mouths.
Yep.
Almonds?
They're bad for the environment, but we just can't stop.
They're also the worst of all nuts. I'm just going to say it. Nope. I'm going to say it.
Well, we hate on almonds.
The thing about
They
almonds
just
is,
taste like nothing. There's just nothing going on in an almond, It's just...
yeah, but Adam, they're expensive.
That's a good point.
So they're good.
That's an excellent
And that's
point.
why we need those donations.
I forgot about that part.
The almond budget is always tapped out because those little fuckers, they're like $10 a nut.
Yeah, just give me cashews all day, every day. That's...
Or cash. Just straight hard cash.
Cash to cashew. Cash for cashews is our new donation program. Where you donate to us and then we spend the money on
Cash for cashews.
It's like cash
Also,
for gold, but we're just
maybe
buying nuts.
exactly. I don't know if we've talked about this in the podcast before, but if anybody doesn't know what cashews look like in the wild, any of our listeners, I encourage you to go do some Googling. Just Google cashew fruit, and you might be wondering, fruit, what does that have to do with cashews? The answer is
That's a great question.
that cashews are actually little they're being so there's a kind of a fruit, right? Cashew fruit. It basically poops out a cashew nut.
Oh yeah, like out of the bottom.
Like out of the bottom. There's like a cashew nut just kind of like hanging off the bottom, right? Mm-hmm. And the whole thing is covered in like a skin that it's kind of like poison ivy-ish, like it makes you super itchy and it's like horrible, So like cashews are harvested by you harvest all these fruits and then you cut the little poop off the bottom. That's the cashew, and then it's be like de-skinned.
What happens to the fruit? Is the fruit
the
good?
fruit apparently is pretty good, but it doesn't keep well enough to be like shipped anywhere really. So like you can eat it locally, like where cashews are grown, but like you don't really get to eat it anywhere else.
So the people who are cutting off the cashew poop part, they can just eat the cashew fruit as a snack because nobody else can have it anyway.
Yeah, but I encourage you to go Google it because it's one of those things. Like I don't remember why I saw a picture of it at some point, but I saw a picture and I was like, no,
That's
too
not how
stupid.
this works. It can't be.
This is too stupid.
I learned yesterday that whole milk is 3% fat.
Yeah, right? Isn't that
Do you know
stupid?
what it is?
I learned that also recently, but yeah.
Well, what else would it be? Like 100%?
Well, yeah,
proportionally, that would make sense.
you just think that the whole would mean something.
Yeah, it said because I always was confused about the 2% situation, right? Because I was
Like why does it go whole 2 1? And
Yeah,
then
that seems like a weird,
Skim.
huge jump to start with from apparently 100% to 2%. Like what? Wow, that's crazy.
Well, that's because everything in between just tastes like shit. Like you either need all the fat. You need to just be drinking pure fat, and that's delicious.
That's true.
But if you start to go a little bit lower than that, it's terrible. And then once you get back down to
food
2,
naming
it's
conventions.
great again.
Yeah, because it's true. It's
named
like you've got whole milk, which is 3%, and you've got half and half, which is actually a different kind of thing, but it is sort of like half fat. Like it's
Yeah,
'Cause it has
it's
like-
probably
it's like-
actually 50%. I would imagine.
it's very fat.
Butter's like 80% or something like that.
Yeah, butter's like 80%. Unless you get like the really good stuff, then it like creeps up to like 84.
So butter
which for
isn't
some
even
reason is a lot
whole
better.
milk.
Yeah, butter's even whole.
Yeah, butter's 80% milk.
I don't know who's naming this, but yeah, with milk you got your whole, then you got 2%, then you got half and half, which is also milk, but also is more than whole. I don't
Although
know
is
what's
half and
happening
half
anymore.
maybe half and half is like half whole milk, like half of it is whole milk, right? And then the other half is like all of the fat they scraped off of all the other milk.
They just scrape it off
or something.
This makes me think, have you guys seen the sort of I can't remember what it's called, but it's like a generic brand of food and groceries and stuff that Canada has, where their packaging is just like yellow. It's just a yellow void with black text on it, all lowercase, and it'll just say something like apple beverage.
Oh yeah, I think I have seen this. Yeah.
There's a similar brand here its brand is brandless. Like that's the name of the brand.
Yeah, stuff like that. Yeah. Because you don't see those people talking about whole milk and stuff. It'll just be like milk. And then on the side, they'll say what the nutrition info is.
That probably has to still say whole or whatever, because that's all really regulated in terms of like what the thing actually means is kind of irrelevant. It's just that you have to use the
that's
same
what
meaning.
We've all agreed
But I think
to call it.
Like, you regulated a bunch to make sure it's called a particular thing, but then that thing that you called it has no
it doesn't
actual
have
bearing on anybody's ability to understand what's happening. You call it 2% when it's actually half. 2% is half. Like what?
Well, 2% is probably 2%,
but it's 2%.
I don't know
but it's not
what.
2%.
But there's 3% and then there's 2%. So it's not half, but you know what I mean. Like
It's not. Yeah, but if they called it 2/3 milk, then you'd be like, but what? What 2/3 of what? What's left?
Yeah.
Is it like 2/3 milk, 1/3 water, or is it like they're keeping 2/3 of the
what
fat?
are we measuring? Apparently it's the fat measurement. But
I don't know. You can really get around all these problems by just no longer drinking milk, which has been my strategy for years, and it's been great.
Milk?
Yeah, but then it gets confusing because now it's even weirder because you're like, oh, here's because I drink this very specific silk type because they have like 100 types, which is like cashew and soy and something because it's like a high protein one, And it's good. I like it, but it is extremely confusing, like trying to figure out what I am actually drinking. Like what?
Mostly water.
It is mostly water, definitely, but then so is milk. Like all of it's mostly
that's
water.
true.
But like, what's the rest of it though? I just have no idea.
It's those cashews. It's those little poop nuts.
Yeah,
It's those poop nuts.
But so before we get into it, we want to talk about Project Zomboid. But I just want to also say, if you guys are interested in this kind of stuff, look into other things too. Because even just looking at like what what chocolate or cacao or whatever, right? Like what that looks like beforehand, or coffee.
Yeah.
Like once things go through this process and then they get roasted and everything else, like the end result looks nothing like what it started as, and you'd be kind of surprised.
Surprising.
Yeah, like if you saw coffee in the wild, you probably wouldn't know that that's what you're looking at.
It's just like it's like a shrub with little berries.
Yeah, it's got like red berries, right?
Yeah,
and then like the coffee bean is like inside of it.
Because coffee is a bean from inside of a fruit, right? It's just like you don't think about that normally, but yeah, it's
that's
like
that's what it is.
That's what it is. I don't know anything about how that fruit tastes.
Probably. Well, if it tastes anything like coffee, probably not good. I mean, here's the thing: I drink coffee all the time, but I admit, it's not. It's not a great flavor.
It is.
It's bitter.
It is specific. There's a sci-fi series. I'm trying to remember who it's by. But in this sci-fi series, it's like there's like pan-galactic federation with all these alien species and stuff, and one of the kind of it's not exactly a joke, but it's just like the part of the world building is that coffee is this thing that like it's hard to get because like you're in space, right? But it's something that humans specifically are just like obsessed with, is like getting coffee. But all other alien species find the smell and like everything about coffee to be so horrible that the coffee shops have to be like in an isolated
segmented out,
like separated out
like a fumigation chamber,
so that it could be like strictly accessed by only humans, as they go through and stuff.
So humans are getting up like, it smells so good. Well, the aliens are just throwing up in the corner. Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of thing that people don't think about when we meet aliens, is that, our senses are going to be completely different from theirs. It's like maybe the way that they talk is through horrible screeching sounds that like blow out our eardrums,
Yeah.
And
or maybe they talk by eating our heads off. you know?
Yeah, because they just regrow their heads, you know. And maybe like they can't make facial expressions, but they can regrow a head with a new one, and that's how they emote, right?
Yeah.
And so like, and also that's very nutritious, you know. You meet a stranger, you have a snack, have a conversation.
It's not nutritious for the stranger though, because now they have to regenerate their head.
Yeah, but then they just eat your head, and it kind of goes back and forth. And that's okay, you know. But we don't do that because that's not our culture. So
we don't grow our heads fast enough.
let's talk about Project Zomboid.
Yeah.
Okay. So we played this game. I knew
We're a little late to the party, I think, is a fair.
Okay. Yeah. I knew zero about this game. So who was it that suggested it?
Sam
I suggested, a friend of mine.
I've seen it advertised, like, you know, on Steam for some time. I didn't realize since 2013, since that's when it came out. But
it's been it's from the Quadrupus Rampage days.
That's true. It is.
So Sam, why did you recommend this game? What did you know about it beforehand?
I've seen it on Steam. It's been recommended to me on Steam, I think, for about 10 years. I think it's
I have seen it sort of like crop up in my recommendations on Steam.
It's
as
been
well.
constantly there. The reason I recommended it was because I was talking to a good friend of mine. We were chatting about video game stuff, and he had mentioned getting really into Project Zomboid sometime in the last couple of months. And he just vaguely, you know, described some of the scenarios he would get in, and it sounded kind of like the RimWorld situation where you're just like, "What? How did that happen? Like, what level of sim is happening in this environment?" But it's actually, you know, it's you playing as a survivor in the zombie apocalypse. And I think the reason that it kind of punched back up onto my radar after, you know, 7 years of just continuously going near me, but then it doesn't look great. You know, it's one of those, like, it's art style wise, doesn't like look the best. So,
well, I think it looks fine. They kind of went for more of like a realistic kind of a look, right? Where like all the people have proportions and like the colors of things are all like just what you would see out in the world.
It looks
stuff like that,
like an old game.
Yeah, but then I guess, you know, when
it's not stylized. Like I think that's what you mean, right?
Yeah, it's not stylized.
It doesn't have like an opinion really about. Like,
and like the UIs are just rows of text.
The
like
UIs are very bad.
Yeah, I would just describe it as like everything aesthetically is utilitarian. Is how.
Yes.
Like the programmers needed those to exist, and so they do. Yeah.
And so they had released a multiplayer update, I believe, maybe some time ago. I'm going to say it wrong, so I'm just going to guess 6 months. Anyways, that's sort of what caused it to kick back up on my radar again, because it was popping up again on reviews and on YouTube, and people are just like, "Oh my god, this is something else." You know, quit sleeping on it if you've still been sleeping on it after like 7 years. So, as listeners may know, we play zombies. We play Back 4 Blood typically together one night a week to kind of just, you know, hang out, have some brotherly time shooting zombies in the face. But after, I think it's almost been more than a year playing that every week, we kind of run out of stuff to do there in terms of continued growth and stuff. So
yeah, I'm still not bored yet because I just like shooting zombies. But
it's not boring to play by any stretch. But I think as far as getting that progression and like new feel, kind of.
Well, yeah, the only new things we can experience, I feel, in Back 4 Blood is new combinations of things that are nearly impossible to deal with. Like, now it's like acid zombies and fire zombies and sniper zombies, and also we have no oxygen and we're dying constantly. You know,
also, it's like, explode when you kill them. Great, cool.
Yeah.
And we haven't played through the latest expansion yet. We started it, and it's pretty fun. They got some new wild, you know, enemies and stuff. But we definitely got our asses kicked pretty handily.
We got wrecked.
Yes.
So we've been working through that, and I was just like, I think, you know, maybe it's time. Maybe it's time to just try another thing and see. And that way we can have a choice of what flavor of zombie situation do we want.
It still has to be a zombie game.
I mean, it's Zombros. That's the name of it.
Unfortunately, there's so few zombie games to choose.
I know. There's very
slim
little.
Slim pickings. So we took Project Zomboid for a spin. I knew nothing about it aside from just, you know, what I guess passively gleaned from, you know, seeing it around on occasion. And so we hopped in, and I think the number of like kind of funny things that it does on the multiplayer side is kind of awesome, where you don't start all together, you start separately. So a big part of it first is just figuring out like where the fuck is everybody and how can we co-locate. But then the reality is that you are extremely fragile, and like the whole point is that you're going to die. Like it's not so much it's not framed around survival in the long term sense, really, because I mean maybe once you get really good at it is, but I think mainly.
Well, even when it starts, like the first thing you see as you come into the world of your character is this is the story of how you died. Like that's,
yeah, they really set it up
framing,
where it's like you're going to get destroyed. And this is very true because you could spawn in a house, open your map, and then the world continues going while you can't see shit. And you are looking at your map, and then, I think it's this case, you got eaten by a zombie.
Yeah. Like actually, the first thing that happened was I zoned into the game, and then they popped up a dialogue explaining the controls because they could tell that it was my first time playing, right? But while I was looking at that dialogue, which was a big box in the middle of my screen, I could hear some kind of like crunching, chomping noise. And I'm like, what is this? And so I dismissed the dialogue, and behind that window was my character being eaten by a zombie. Right? So my first go at the game, I, without exaggeration, died immediately.
Yep.
Like within the first second of being in there, I was dead.
Yeah, my first go, I was in a tiny, tiny house, and it was the same deal. Like I had no idea what was happening, so I was like trying to figure out what the menus were and stuff. And I could hear just a zombie banging on the door, right? And I pretty quickly grokked that, like, okay, there's like a zombie trying to break into this house, But I didn't know, like, can they?
Yeah, like, does the door break? This is the door problem all over again.
Yeah, what am I supposed to? What am I supposed to do? Because I'm just in this tiny house, And there was the same deal. It's like that was doing that. And I didn't realize that there was another similar sound, which was a zombie also banging on a window, and then all of a sudden the window breaks and a zombie climbs through it, and then I don't know how to interact with it yet. So I'm like hitting buttons trying to like do something to the zombie, and it just keeps biting me.
Yep.
As I'm like trying to figure it out. And then I also died within about
so it's very much a rough and tumble sort of a situation.
Trial by fire.
But I think what was fun about it, and we talk about the nailing it or whiffing it thing, and I think I would call it a nail it, despite the fact that of course it is what you would call deeply unfriendly to newcomers in terms of just how much is hidden, how much you cannot possibly know in order to figure out, and how much they don't care. So like spawning you into a zombie's mouth is a good example to me of like the devs not really caring a lot about the initial experience. But also importantly, I think is the reality is I think those initial upsets are all really congruent with the game, with the theme, which is like it's hard out here. And you're going to get fucked up. And they really, they take that very seriously, I guess, in terms of making sure that point is driven home across the board in the onboarding.
Yeah. My only real complaints about it are kind of from an onboarding UI UX, because I agree, like it all kind of still works together, but there's some stuff that like core things like how you equip stuff. You know what I mean? Like how you and what equipping even means is something that like after we played, I've still got significant uncertainty about, because you can.
They use the weird words. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you can equip. You can like right click and equip something, but then you can like equip soap, for example, right? But like you don't see anything happen, so like I'm not sure what that means that I did that. Mm-hmm. And then if you equip but you can also put items on like on your belt. If you have a belt, you can like put it. And on your back too. So you can strap a shovel to your back, and then that you see in like a little hotbar. It's like, oh, I hit 3 in my shovel because I'm holding my shovel now, right? But you can also equip. Where'd the soap go? Yeah, where'd the soap go? And you can also equip a baseball bat, but that's not on your back. So like you can have a shovel on your back and then be holding a baseball bat, and then you can switch to your shovel. Where'd the bat?
What happens to the baseball bat?
Yeah, but I think this is the interesting thing. Is like it's one of those where we always talk about what's the point when you get into when you're buying a game or you're trying to play a game with friends or whatever else. Like what's important versus what may appear super important, or even be super important from a moment to moment usability standpoint. But that really it fades in the background if the congruence of the whole thing is really actually working well,
or not even that, or if your willingness to put up with it is high enough. Because I think that's always the
key.
I
think that's actually what happens, which is like if you have this really good. If you have like a weird enough flavor, basically, of game that's unique enough, then people will stick around through the nonsense. So I think, as with most of these very good games, there's a lot of nonsense still. But the overall feel actually was very fun. We ended up playing for I think 3 hours or so on accident.
Yeah, I think if I was trying it out by myself, I would have been kicked out within 5 minutes.
Oh, 100%.
Because I think it's one of the onboarding UI UX is actually so bad that it requires that you either already just be bought into knowing there's actually all kinds of really interesting, fun, cool mechanics in here, right? Because just shit we found out at the very end of our play session that because there's a map, right? And I was like, why can't I there's all these glyphs that you can put on the map, except you can't. And then I clicked on something that was oh, requires a pen. And I was like, oh shit, I've been seeing pins like in, every time I've been trying to loot
Yeah,
stuff.
you have to have a pin in your inventory to be able to mark the map.
Yeah, which is awesome actually, right? And we figured out after a while that like, oh, you can like if you get bed sheets, you can like rip them up, and then and then you can sterilize them, and now you can use them as bandages, right? Like sterile bandages. And then we found out later like, oh, you can wash if you have bandaged yourself and it gets dirty, you can take it off and then wash it, and now it's sterile again, and you can put it back on. Like there's like all these really interesting, fun interactions between things. They have figured out how to cook stuff at some point, Yeah, it's like
I was just making stews. We would go to a new house, kill all the zombies, with guitars because we had found some guitars, and then Seth and Adam would go ransack the place, and I would just start cooking a stew on the stove, which I found hilarious.
Yeah, so there's actually like a lot of depth, and I totally understand the problem of like how do you actually construct a good UI UX for all of that interactivity, right, between things.
I kind of like their approach where they were just like, you don't. And then
and honestly, the approach is I do think is kind of, like you said, it works, right? You just kind of you mostly just right click on stuff and like see if you can do something, right?
Well, it optimizes for them being able to put more stuff in, right?
Yeah, you can just put tons of stuff in, yeah. But the problem is you just can't, like when you're first coming into the game, it's so inaccessible, not that you can do something but can't figure out how, but that you have no idea if you can even do anything, right? Like you just don't know what the options are. And I think to me, I think that's where the game, I think, whiffs it, is on that aspect of the onboarding, in the sense of like, you have to already be bought into the idea that this game is deep and rich, and that you have to figure it out. And if you come
I think you come with friends, right?
But we're like you as a friend group also coming with that, right? Because like we could have easily come in and been like, if we weren't willing to like engage with it and try to figure it out, and we were just like trying to play, you know what I mean? Just like,
the game's not going to hand anything to you, including
we would have had a bad time too. Yeah, exactly.
So I'll say, for me, I would say it whiffed hard in the first hour, and then it nailed it. And I think there's two reasons. One is it took us 25 minutes to actually connect to each other in multiplayer. We had to do so much Googling, reading, and figuring out just like, how the fuck do we get into a game together?
And then it turned out to be easy. Like the golden path works really well.
Well, right? I think that's kind of true of just about everything in this game, which is there's nothing in this game that's actually that hard. It's figuring out how to even know about it is the hard part, including just like starting playing.
That's kind of what the fun of these kinds of games, I think, often is, right?
Yeah, can be. Yeah. If you can be.
So that's my first whiff, was just I wanted to just open the game and play with my friends, which was just that step was just so hard.
Yeah. And I would say that even if they didn't use because I actually do have this, they're using Steam Connect, right? It's hard to figure out exactly how to make that go, right? But even if they weren't, and they're going really old school, and like you had to directly connect and somebody to do port forward and that kind of stuff, if we just knew that was how it worked, right? Then fine, I'll go do some port forwarding, we'll set up whatever. We've done this before, we can do that, right? But the problem was there were so many options, and it
looks like that's what you have to do.
Yeah, it wasn't clear what the thing is you're supposed to do, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so that was bad, but actually the second part was okay. So I used to play EVE Online, and one of the things that people talk about in EVE Online is this framing of don't get attached to your ship. Your ship is like ammunition. Okay, it's going to get used up. So don't think of this ship as like the end all be all. Don't think of it's like your dream ship. It's just a ship, right? And I felt like if this game had sort of taken that angle with my character, I would have had a much better time, because
which it does practically. You've done a good job.
So at the beginning, they give you this big character customization thing,
because customize their look and
choose
all
their name, all these traits and stuff, and lots of traits. And so my first time through, I was like, "Ooh, yeah." What kind of character do I want to be? Right? And I spent 5 minutes going through all the options, and this was the time where I zoned in and instantly got eaten. Right? And then I went back in. I was like, oh fuck, because apparently you can save those characters, so you can load it back in. So I remade the same character, spent all that time, saved it this time, loaded it, died another 5 minutes. Right? And it wasn't actually until I started just hitting the randomize button that I started actually having fun. Because once I no longer cared about this character and I more cared about just like getting into the world and trying stuff, and I was no longer attached, then I started having a great time, right? And so I think the problem is it's kind of framed as like, who do you want to be? What kind of survivor do you want to be? You know, which it just doesn't seem to jive with the nature of the game, you know, where like my best character, the one that I ended up, you know, living the longest with at the end, just had all these bizarre negative traits.
Oh yeah, mine had a laundry list of negative traits.
And like a bunch of stuff. Yeah, Sam's character couldn't hear,
which actually means that Sam can't hear like zombie noises or anything.
There's literally no sound effects, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, and so like at the beginning we were all doing this. At the beginning we were like trying to like make these like good characters that we could like. Yeah, and then our successful playthrough was actually us just all with completely random characters, often with huge drawbacks, because we had stuck with the game long enough that we as players learned how to navigate the world, right? So it's so much less about what your character can or can't do. And I feel like it's just a weird like I feel like if they had literally just made it so that you don't design your character, you always come in with a fully randomized character, I actually probably would have had a much better time at the beginning.
Yeah. So,
it did nail it in the end.
Yeah, that's because I think so. To the game's credit, there's a reason it has 122,000 reviews on Steam, right? Which is well for what it's been out for 10 years, but it's a very successful game. It's in the very positive tier, I believe, if I remember right. So like, and I think it's one of those things like people play it a fuckload, right? And I would imagine it would go to like it's actually. Given what it is, it could bump into overwhelmingly positive if like it did have a cleaner overarching like design, right? In terms of like how onboarding went, how they framed stuff and presented it to you, as Seth was talking about. So this is one of those things. It's like, as Sam is often saying, right? Like if a game can have legs and really get away with a lot, right? A lot of like jank and suboptimal aspects of the experience. If a certain set of conditions are met, right? If it somehow otherwise like nails something really, really well. And so I think that's the evidence that you see. Like RimWorld is similar, right? It's like a really hard game to get started playing. Not as hard, but still a pretty hard game to get started playing. But once you do and start to, and like the depth starts to kind of expand, right? And I think in both of those games, the whole idea, you kind of have to learn for yourself pretty quickly, but it's the whole idea is like, you're just having an experience, don't get too invested. It's kind of like the whole thing. And then it's just a storytelling engine, right? And there just isn't anything else quite like it and nothing else quite as expansive that I think it can still do okay. But that is one of those, like, you're in that really risky territory as a game developer where, because people have to be bought in to, because they basically have to they have to trust you to go have that experience. And so that trust has to come from somewhere first, right? And it can come from, because the game was launched in 2013, there weren't nearly as many games coming out at that time. That was a peak of just on the other side of the crest of like the indie wave, right? People were doing all kinds of fun, interesting stuff. And so like the timing of that game coming out was probably really good. That was also when there were like YouTubers who were doing mixed content, which there just really kind of aren't anymore, right? And also like streamers who were doing mixed content, which there aren't anymore. And so like it came out probably at a time when you could get away with a lot more because people had more just inherent trust, right? More.
This was a time when people would actually say things like, "Oh, I love indie games," like as if indie games was like a category, like a genre of game. You know, that was like right at the tail end of that. But
and it's possible that if that game launched today, it could still be as successful, because we still see games kind of like this where like they're kind of messy, right? But there's something they do really well that manages to get people's trust so that they can.
I think the reality is that it nails what it is pitching, which is that you get to go be a survivor in the zombie apocalypse, and it's basically it's a very simulated real world sort of experience, right? As far as just like the amount of weird things that you can do. Cleaning glass out of windows so you don't cut yourself after you break them to get into some place. Needing to have a can opener to open cans, which again is a lot of these things are mundane. Like they're completely mundane facts, but when you stack them all together, they paint a particular kind of picture for a kind of gameplay. And so, I think again, when we talk about marketing, we talk about what makes a game really work at the end of the day. And it's like all of the enslickening at the beginning is really trying to make it so that people don't unnecessarily fall out. You know what I mean? Like falling out for dumb reasons when they would enjoy the game otherwise, because it took 30 minutes to try to figure out how to get it to work. You can't even figure out how to get it to work. You're done, or you just keep spawning it and get to eat in the first 2 seconds and can't read the tutorial messages or whatever. Most of that, like I think the reality is that there is still a subset of people who, if the premise is strong enough and if the overall, like if the clarity of what you're delivering on is obvious enough, then I think there is some percentage of the total audience, whoever buys the game, who just will stick it out because you're giving them exactly what they want. Like we haven't played a game like that before, where there really is that sim and action combined component of what feels like a real zombie apocalypse in a very intense sense. Like all the little shit you have to be very careful of, which like most games don't bother with because that's not what they're trying to do. They're trying to make like an action game or whatever else. But
it hits that right combo too, right? Because I think games like Ark and some of these other kind of survival games, I think also kind of hit a lot of that. But in those ones, like the investment, because they're basically crafting games, right? And so the investment that you make into the world and into your character, into progression is so high that it just feels worse and worse as you like have your plans disrupted, And I imagine that in this game that's true too. But like so far, even in the first few hours of play, like we haven't made plans. We haven't progressed, like we've actually survived I went from almost dead where like every step I would just bleed onto the ground. Right. And I was like at like 5% health or something. And I just had lacerations on my whole body, to us figuring out that, we figured out how to make bandages. And like I got myself wrapped
basically
up,
we saved Adam's character.
And to the point where now like I'm back at max health, wearing clean bandages. One of my wounds is healed even, And I'm like, we found a school. We've all got backpacks. We all got, a red pen, a blue pen, and a black pen and a pencil, so we can mark up.
We're starting to plan out our trajectory on the map.
Yeah, and all of our characters are so dumb because you read books to like learn how to do stuff, but you read books depending on because you can also have like buffs and debuffs in your character for like how fast you read, right? Or if you even can. I don't know if there's a literacy one or not, but there probably is a bit. So,
but I think it's just that you read really, really slowly or something.
My character is Devin, reads very slow.
Yeah, so, but it's like a page every 2 seconds or something like that. But it's like a 220-page book, right? So you have to literally just have your character not do anything else for literally 5 minutes of real time. Right?
But you can, pick the book back up where you left off. Yeah. So something you can do is, for example, like if your character's exhausted, you can just sit on the ground and like rest, and you can like read a book while your character kind of like recovers their stamina, so like you can start to learn these kind of overlaps of like how to better take advantage of your time,
if you find a pretty safe zone to like set up shop and do such a thing.
But yeah, I think it's a fascinating one. I think if you haven't given it a try by now, especially if you've got a friend or two, to go into it new with.
It'll be it's a lot more fun as a multiplayer.
Yeah, I think it's actually the case with most of these games that have a lot of that kind of either rough onboarding or where a lot of the fun of the game is in figuring it out. Is I think actually doing those single player is typically much less enjoyable.
I think Terraria was a similar experience, right?
Same thing for me.
We had to get just going with the idea of like, people love this game, so it must for some reason, like we must not be seeing why it's good yet, right? And when my wife and I play multiplayer games, it's also the same thing that we do. Is we just like the first part of the thing is just like trying to figure out what's going on and how to play it, and so much of the experience is actually just that collaborative effort of like trying to figure out what the game is. It's tons
of fun when you're with friends doing it. I think when you're by yourself, it's very annoying.
And I think I think you're right. That's where. In particular, where games that don't invest as heavily, or just it's a kind of game where it's just there's not a good way to do smooth onboarding, I think in either case, if that game is also multiplayer, I think that's one of the things that can really save it. Although probably it wasn't for a long time, right?
I think about like a board game. Right, like board games are also generally pretty rough in terms of onboarding. What makes them work is there's almost always a person who, even if they aren't a fan of the game, maybe like it was their idea to play it, right?
Yeah, so was it.
So then everybody else is like, well, man, I don't want to be a dick. Like, I'll give
stay
this
invested for the 20 minutes.
I'll listen because I don't
clarifications.
want Steve to feel bad that like he said we should play this game and then we all agreed and then I don't want to 10 minutes in be like fuck this game and just leave, right?
Yep.
So like when you have that kind of a scenario, which is what happens like in this case, then yeah, like people will just figure out the rules together and they'll figure out the jank together. And that's then part of the game experience.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you do this in single player, which is also, I think why, like you were saying, you're suddenly seeing like a big resurgence of this game now that it has multiplayer. And I think that's a big part of it, you know? Yeah.
But it can now, the people who already loved it in single player now get to also onboard people who
Yes.
wouldn't play it otherwise, right? And actually, yeah, it was kind of funny. We were talking before we started the night where Seth was like, oh, maybe we should start playing WoW and start leveling up characters, right? And for me, like WoW has this like feeling of huge investment, right?
It's daunting.
It's daunting. It also has a feeling of really high complexity. I mean, I've played it a few times. Every time I've played it, I'm like, there's just so many things going on in that I can do, right? That I'm just like instantly overwhelmed, and I'm like, this is not how I like to play video games. I like to be relatively brain dead, and just that's why I like shooting zombies, you know.
Yeah.
And so they were like, oh, well, let's try this, Project Zomboid out, right? Which is kind of funny because like the way I presented it was like because I'm a noob and I want something more chill.
Yeah, right? Adam's like, I want like a more chill kind of casual game experience. And then we go play this thing and we're just
survival sim.
Yeah, we're just getting like instantly gnawed on by zombies and murdered all left.
But even still, like I'm having a good time because like the investment cost per moment is actually low, right? But the reason that I've played WoW in the past, and the reason I would even entertain like playing it again today, is not because like I literally don't want to, right? But because like Sam and Seth are both playing it, Seth's has played a fuckload of it, right? That I know that I can be onboarded in like the smoothest way possible, right? If like I did actually play, and that I could like learn quickly and figure out what is I'm actually into and like do stuff. So I know that I could actually have a good time despite the fact that the game itself is not the kind of thing I would normally have a good time with, right?
Yeah. And admittedly, like that game also does not onboard you into the things that actually matter for you to like.
Yeah, you can't tell what's
a good
important.
time.
Yeah, right. And so I think that's the kind of the fun thing about something like Project Zomboid being a single player game that had a huge following. Going into multiplayer is that you've now taken this huge group of people who can enjoy this kind of experience with other people, right? But even so, will struggle to like get past the part where it's kind of a shitty time at the beginning, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And now they get to get pulled in by all these people who already enjoy it. So now all of a sudden all these people like who liked it get to share the thing that they like with other people, right? And all these other people who didn't get to have that experience at all because it just wasn't going to be for them in that state now get to have that experience, right? And it becomes a very cool thing, actually.
Yeah. So I'd say Project Zomboid.
It's a whiff and a nail. It's like you swing your club, right? And then you come back around and then you nail it. It's like
it whiffs out of the gate and then nails it if you stick with it and bring friends, you know? Yeah. So, all right, let's get into some questions with our last chunk of time here. So these questions come from our listeners over at podcast.bscotch.net. The highest upvoted question comes from Gibbs, who says, would you guys ever consider making any behind-the-scenes videos of what you're working on for Crashlands 2 like you did for Crashlands? Inkscape videos, programming videos, etc.
Yes. Largely what we've been holding our tongue for is basically the ability to make a large-scale announcement at some point when we are ready to do so and we have our business stuff lined up. And those things kind of go together, right? Because in a lot of cases with business partners, they want to be a part of the announcement or you want to be able to offer that as a piece of the puzzle. So I think once we're announced, then we'll probably be doing a few devlogs, talking about a couple different things or else, letting people know how stuff is put together or why or even just like those fun behind the scenes things where it's like, I imagine like I want to do some kind of David Attenborough style. Just dumb like little creature
introduce the creatures.
Because the thing is like we have this weird ecology and like everything's reacting to everything and the creatures out in the world just eating each other like a crazy nature document.
Well, and I think that's there's this challenge with like behind the scenes game content, right? Which is there are just in the same way that games are these incredibly multifaceted technical and like artistic and psychological products, right? The behind the scenes stuff covers the same kind of gamut of in the weeds to high level view to like what angle that you're taking. Like, are you taking it from a design lens to say like, oh, here's why we did this, or are you demonstrating how we're trying to do something? Like are we showing the game change that we've talked about a lot in the podcast, and like here's how we use it to do stuff, right?
Yeah, who's your audience?
Yeah, because each one of those kinds of things has such a different audience. And when we're in this phase where we don't know what our launch strategy is exactly, like we know like what our sort of cascade of plans are in the high level view, right? Like there's certain kind of business partnerships that we're trying to get, and if we get those, then that's like our priority, and then we know what that'll look like. Again, high level, because details will change depending on what the details actually are.
Yeah, it hasn't crystallized enough for us to start, making.
Yeah, so we can't like pick what kind of stuff do we want to share and to whom, and are the different aspects of the game and like our process and the game's sort of publishing situation, are those all in the right place for each of those different things, right? Because like the fact that like we could right now just start putting out like low level content of like, here's like how our systems work, and like here's like how our art pipeline works. Like we could put out that kind of stuff because that doesn't really impact the consequences.
It's not showing
of like
the game.
It's not really showing the game exactly, though it'll give you glimpses of like the game in its current state, because we want to make sure that we don't put out stuff and say like, oh, here's all the design decisions we made that turn out to all not be what the game looks like anymore, right?
Yeah. I think in a lot of ways, for me, looking back on, I don't know, the last 10 years of doing dev stuff, I think I definitely prefer before a game comes out to be focused on it from a player facing angle of like, here's this cool thing in the game. You know what I mean? Like here's stuff. And then once it is out and it has either done well or not, then to be focused on the how we did it and the kind of dev side of things. If that makes sense.
And that's also where the audiences come from, right? Because in the same way you can't get a GDC talk unless you've got a popular game or blog post or something, right, to back it up. And
yeah,
so
the retrospectives are what people want, because if you're talking about here's how we're making a game that you can't play and don't know anything about,
nobody
right?
cares.
Nobody actually cares.
People will care.
How did you do that? That's what you want that question. I'll answer that question.
Yeah, people will care if you're Rami Ismail and you're like and then you're like talking about a game in public because he already is a public figure in the space, right? Or if you are the guy who made Super Meat Boy or like any of these kinds of things, right? Like if you already have some particular following for a particular audience,
focus
like,
on that.
Yeah, you can, but think about like so that content then would be like, oh, here's for the developers who like follow this person, or here's for the huge player fan base who follows that person's game, right?
Yeah, I think a mistake that I think a lot of indies make is the idea that those are somehow the same.
They're not the same.
It's like a 0.1% to 99.9% ratio of like people who will play a game versus people who will now like follow the developer on Twitter, listen to their podcast, watch their behind the scenes videos, and I think the other kind of weird thing about that is that it creates a very strange bubble for the developer, because the people who they're interacting with and hearing from the most are not actually the mainstream of their players. They're people who are like really into like game design and game development and hearing behind the scenes stuff, right? Which doesn't necessarily mean it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just you gotta understand. You gotta understand that that's the environment that you're kind of like building around yourself. So if you do something that seems like it's generating a lot of interest based on the people who are following you or the retweets you're getting or whatever, that may not actually be reflective of what's going on with your players at large, right? So yeah, it's just an interesting problem to have. But yeah, and also like we never actually did behind the scenes programming videos for anything at Crashlands. No, Sam just did some Inkscape stuff, and then we had the documentary crew that followed us around toward the very end. It was like the last few months of development, with some interviews and stuff like that, which was, it was largely focused on the human side of what we were doing at that time and what Sam was going through, and and, building a game as a family where one of those family members is going through a traumatic event, So it wasn't really like, here's how we are making this game.
The game was sort
technically.
of we could have been running.
And the game was
together,
pretty much done by then, Yeah. And so like Adam was saying, the technical side of stuff is very context dependent. And especially with all the tools that we have now, like I can't imagine Sam putting together any kind of a brief, understandable video of like, here's how I like come up with an idea and turn it into an art asset that goes into the game.
It would need to be a series, right? Where it like starts off with an example of it in action, where it's like fast paced, like all sped up. Where it's like,
I think the point is like the pipeline is our pipeline.
It's our pipeline. It's not complicated. It just requires a lot of context understanding.
But it is the kind of thing that's like really cool for people to see the kinds of ways that people can solve these problems, right? So that they can then go to their own context and ask like, okay, was there something I can take from that, right?
Yeah, but I think again, those really people don't really care about our answers to these questions until after something has already been obviously successful. That's generally true.
Unless they're already looking for an answer, and that the answers we provided are discoverable in some way, right? And that's where you have. But again, that's now where you have.
It's very narrow.
Well, it's like the way to do that would be if we have some way of like putting out a video and the subset of the existing game developer community would be aware that we did that. Right.
That's where talks come in. That's like if you want to do that, I think that's where you go pick a particular conference that has an angle, But otherwise, I think, what I would do, again, is do stuff that actually the majority of people would be interested in, which is, I think, seeing the creative process behind like a creature coming to life is super fun. But I wouldn't get into how the pipeline works. You know what I mean? It would just it'd be much more fun.
You wouldn't talk about how it works necessarily. It would just be like, then I, bring it into the game changer. Mm-hmm. Right. And we have to talk about like how the whole game changer works.
Yeah. Well, everything becomes like a one-line explanation, right? Where it's like, bring it to the game changer, which is where we manage all of the information and data about all of the game assets, And then,
and people would see the game changer, but they would have to kind of.
Well, I'm saying I probably would just skip that for players because they don't care.
Then we just bring it into the game.
Yeah, that's what I do because that's what you usually see. You see like you have a 3D model, and it's like, oh, you're fighting in a game, and it's like there's a fuckload of steps between those two things in reality, but no one cares.
Well, it's also the reason why. It's the reason why like the user understanding of software products like games or websites or whatever, right, is so it always feels like there's such a short process between like ideation and product, right? And it's because there's just so much stuff that's hidden.
Yeah, I think about like there's these really fun videos you'll see them on Instagram or TikTok, wherever, where it's digital artists, and all they're doing is they've fully masked over a finished piece of theirs. And they take their pen and they're basically erasing the mask. So they're literally just like, you covered it up with dust and you're just wiping the dust off, right? And so the videos only took like 10 seconds or so. And then you see this whatever giant crazy illustration they've made or portrait or whatever. And the thing is like, that is not it feels like it somehow feels like a encapsulation of the creative process to a person who doesn't do it, right?
Yeah, but it's most completely people. Unrelated to
that. Is unrelated. It's like the demos from E3, right? Where it's like, this is not remotely what this is.
But it is more interesting than them just like, I think TikTok is a good place to kind of see what ways of presenting information like work in a broad way, right? Because like
I've not include is 90% of it.
Yeah, because I've also seen like I've seen a lot of videos early on in my earlier days on TikTok where it would be an artist basically like they would be showing like them actually doing the work right over the video while they're like talking over it a bit, and where the whole time they're complaining about how like nobody wants to watch their video, right? Which of course, like then you're going to swipe away from that because who the fuck wants to listen to that, right? Mm-hmm. And then more recently, what this seems to turn into is Sam, what you're describing of like the art is already done and they're just revealing it to you, but still as if it's still like in the interface. It's still as if they're creating
You're in Clip Studio, you're in Photoshop, or whatever else, right?
But they've realized that like, and what I've been seeing are like new and interesting ways of people like creating the reveal process, right? Yeah. And it's because just showing it like
here's a PNG of my art.
Yeah, doesn't work, right? Yeah.
But also fully telling everybody about how you put it together also doesn't work.
Yeah.
Yeah, because nobody actually wants to see that.
Yeah, because
or you ever
because to walk through like the process of creation, you either need to really care about creation itself. You need to already be like a technical deep dive person, or you need to know what we're going to get on the other side, which means you have to start with the whole picture somehow, right? And so having this like fake thing where we really quickly get the whole picture, but in a way that's disconnected from the reality of how we got it.
It's almost a clickbait thing. Like, like the the YouTube thumbnails where they always have like a red circle with an arrow pointing at it. And you're like, something interesting is happening there. And you click into it. It's nothing. It's just bullshit. Right. So like, or you ever see the videos where it'll be a painting and they always start by being super turbo zoomed in on a tiny paintbrush, and they'll put like one single detail.
They like just finish it. Yeah.
Yep.
And then they zoom out and it's like, wow.
Yeah.
Look at this giant thing, right? And you can, and it like tickles the imagination because you're seeing this little piece and you're like, ooh, somebody's painting something. And you start to
you get this
guess and
idea
imagine
of how they did it and how hard it was,
yeah,
right?
Yeah. And also you feel like you're getting to share that moment with them of like they finally finished this big crazy thing, right? And so it just kind of like you said, really at the end of the day, it's a picture of a painting, which is great, right? But they have to do all these emotional gimmicks to hook you in so that you watch this instead of, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it's got to be part of your
Whatever
experience, right? It's like, it's because the experience that you're looking for on any given medium is not being shown things, right?
I think the critical mistake that you make as a creator of a thing is thinking that the way in which you made it is something that anybody cares about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You know
Well, people will.
There are people who
very few people.
Yeah. That's what I mean. I think if you had to choose to do only one of the things, I would say choose to talk to the large audience who is going to be consuming the work, not the technical shared audience that is other creators of the work.
Yeah. And what they're concerned about is their experience of the work,
creation,
right? And so, but there are ways that you can like just like with the reveal of the thing that already exists, right? There are ways that you can provide something experiential for that audience that even though they're there for the final product, that you can like give them a sense of being part of the process, right? Without having to actually get into any of it. And I think that's where you can like start to kind of bridge that gap a little bit, right? But it is still like, it is just for that audience. Like there isn't really a way to make something that is for the person who wants the end product experientially and the person who wants to know how people do certain things so they can compare that to their own methods and approaches, right?
Yeah.
Or the audience who just like loves what you do specifically and wants to know every tiniest detail, which is like that's the tiniest group anywhere, right? Like who just absolutely love the thing that you do and they want to just know how, different.
Yeah, so just you gotta know your audience. So when it comes to Crashlands 2 stuff, we'll be revealing the game once the time is right. We'll have to figure out the way in which we want to do that based on all the stuff we talked about. But then when it comes to behind the scenes stuff, probably post launch.
Yeah,
really.
Well, it's also a cost problem, right? Like making this kind of content because it only matters if people actually interact with it, right?
Yeah.
Which means it has to be worth interacting with, which means you have to have done the work of figuring out who's the target audience, how do I make something for them, how do I get it in front of them? Because otherwise it doesn't matter.
Leverage wise, it just doesn't make sense.
The cost is really high.
Yeah, and we're not YouTubers, we're not Twitch streamers. Like we don't monetize our YouTube channel, right? And so like,
well, and we don't have pipelines and processes set up for doing that, right? Because people who do like YouTube videos for a living, right? Or people or developers who do a lot of development in public, because that is its own genre of thing, actually, right? Where there are people who like are into the idea of development, they just literally will watch somebody make something, right? And them making the thing is now way slower than it otherwise would be, but actually part of the product and part of the audience is this like pre-launch audience, right? That they're also selling a product to. But to do that, they've had to over time develop approaches and processes and ways of doing the work that make that at all feasible so that it can become economical, in some way or another. And like when you don't have that at all, then you're already starting so far behind. Like it's just the cost is already just really high, right? And you haven't done anything yet to knock the cost down to the point where, maybe because it would be cheap enough, we could do something, right? It's just not.
Yeah, it's hard. I don't know, but we'll revisit that.
Yeah, I think the thing to remember is just that everything is really expensive, right? Like time is really, really expensive, and everything is an opportunity cost. And because so much of the stuff that you see that's really public for indie dev is people who are privileged enough to be able to do indie dev in the first place, which is a very rare position to be in, that they can also just kind of take their time, right, to do it. And that means that they aren't as worried about like, can I pay my employees? Because they probably don't have any, right? Like, it's like, they're not worried about like, oh, when does my runway run out necessarily? Because like, they're probably just not that worried about the runway. And
Or they're doing development on the side of
exactly. Or they're doing other side of other stuff.
It's just a different, it's a different thing.
different mindset. Yeah. So that's where we're at with that. And that's all the time we have for this week. So thank you very much for the question. We'd like to thank our producers Fat Bard and Sampa DeCosta for putting the podcast together, and thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the archives. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.